Hello, thanks for joining me in today's masterclass, IBS 101, Building a Strong Gut. Or the title my husband prefers, How to Have a Gut Like a Goat. I'm Dr. Carin. I'm a naturopathic physician and a registered acupuncturist at Brio Integrative Health Center in Richmond, BC. The bottom line is good health starts with great gut health. And you know that your gut is strong when you're feeling lighter in your gut, when you're getting the most out of what you're eating, and when supporting your gut reduces inflammation in the rest of your body. So if you have any questions during the class, please leave me a comment as we go. I'll do my best to address them. If not right away, then shortly afterwards. Today, what you're going to learn are the critical 4 steps we need to build a strong gut. So here are the 4 steps right here. And of course, I will describe each one later in more detail so you know exactly where you are on this roadmap, as well as what to do at each of these steps. So step 1 is clear. If you think about the gut like a garden, this is where we would be removing the weeds, getting rid of food triggers or microbial overgrowths. Step 2 is spark. This is where we ignite what I call the digestive fire. So that's the power that we have to break down food properly and also coordinate gut movement of the digestive tract. And then step 3 is reboot. So in our garden, once we've cleared out the weeds, this is where we would be feeding the garden and reseeding the garden. And then last step is rebalance. This is where we design our daily habits to actually retrain and reinforce healthy gut function so that we can really rebuild that resilience in the gut. Before I share with you what to do at each step, I just wanted to share with you my morning stomachache story. And let me start by saying I am not a morning person. When I was going to Simon Fraser University, I carpooled with my sister. I would wake up with just enough time to get ready for school. I would have a quick shower and swallow a couple vitamins with a cup of milk. That was my breakfast. Every morning during the first lecture, there would be me in my seat, fists clenched, doubled over in pain with a stomachache. And this went on for months. In fact, my sister and I both had this every day. We would refer to this as our morning stomachache time because we thought it was normal and that everybody had this. It was during this time I also started to develop hay fever for the first time. And then that turned into hay fever all year round. It was like things were starting to snowball at that point. I didn't know at the time what I was eating or how I was eating was connected to my symptoms, and it was only after a lot of study that I had connected my gut health to my allergies and wrist pain and even skin issues. My hope is that I can make the connection much faster for you and give you a roadmap so you can figure out how to rebuild your gut health. Maybe like me though, in the past, maybe you're not sure if gut health is actually an issue. So here are a few questions to help you figure out if you need to build your gut health. So number 1, do you have gut symptoms like reflux, heartburn, abdominal pain, diarrhea, constipation, gas, bloating, bitter taste that's left in your mouth after eating, bad breath? Or have you been diagnosed with esophageal spasms or irritable bowel syndrome, IBS? These issues have become so common, like me. A lot of us think it's normal or a part of aging, but these are signs of an imbalanced digestive system. Maybe you don't have strong gut symptoms, but do you have a chronic condition like an autoimmune condition, rheumatoid arthritis or Hashimoto's? Or do you have any chronic issues like ongoing fatigue or a tendency to migraines and headaches, chronic pain, maybe anxiety or depression, thyroid issues or difficulty concentrating. Maybe like me, allergy symptoms like skin rashes and congestion. Sometimes the gut issues aren't obvious, but almost every chronic condition has been linked to gut issues. Maybe you've been working on improving your gut for some time already. Have you taken probiotics or removed certain foods, but you didn't really see much improvement with that? If so, you're in the right place. We're going to talk about how to use probiotics so that they can actually help. Have you removed foods and it was helpful, but it was just too restrictive and not sustainable to continue to do long term? Eliminating certain foods can be super helpful. That might be wheat or dairy or fermentable carbohydrates. Maybe you've heard of low FODMAP diet or specific carbohydrate diet. These can be really helpful, but they're meant to be used for the shortest amount of time possible while we're repairing the gut health. And our goal is always to increase the variety of foods in your diet. Another question for you. Have you had lab tests come back that were normal, but your symptoms persisted? This is a super common frustration. Maybe you've had H. pylori testing, it was normal. Maybe you've had stool testing for parasites and it came back normal. But you definitely know that things are not normal in the gut. And you don't feel like you have any more understanding of what's going on. One of the issues here is many of these tests are designed to help us identify disease, not the changes in the functions that are occurring in the digestive tract. In naturopathic medicine, we see the development of disease as a progression. So you start from health, and then with lots of processed foods and chronic stress, for example, that health turns into dysfunction. And if there are no changes with our lifestyle, then that dysfunction turns into further dysfunction. And then that, over time, can lead to disease. And that spectrum of dysfunction can be really large. Many of us are in that spectrum right now. And that's why I ask a million questions when I'm assessing my patients and find functional testing to be helpful to assess where we are in that dysfunction spectrum. Lastly, do you eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, but you still feel out of balance, like you're not getting the nutrients out of those foods? Maybe you've been told you have low iron, for example, or B12 deficiency, or have low bone density. If any, or maybe many of these issues pertain to you, then you're in the right place. The 4 steps of building the strong gut that we're going to be talking about are for those who have had chronic indigestion, for those who have plateaued in their treatments, or those who just want to improve their gut in order to get more energy and feel better mood and have less pain in their body. So let's go through those steps now. Now, these steps are in a particular order. This order matters. Chronic gut issues often develop over time, and we have to address the dysfunctions that have accumulated over this time, layer by layer. So at each step, I'm going to be talking about how this particular step builds a stronger gut, and then, of course, what can you do about it in that step. So the first step is clear. We mentioned before, if you think about your gut as a garden, this is where we would be removing the weeds. And by weeds, I'm talking about food triggers. I'm talking about overgrowths of bad bugs in your gut. Let me ask you this. Do you tend to get yeast infections as soon as you have to take antibiotics? Do you feel worse after eating? Generally better with an empty stomach? Do you seem to have sensitivities to a lot of foods, even healthy foods? Have you found taking probiotics and digestive enzymes not particularly helpful, or even actually making symptoms worse? If so, this particular step, clear, is really important. Often probiotics are the first thing that we do, but just like throwing grass seed on a lawn that's overgrown with weeds, not much happens. unless, of course, we clear the weeds first. So let me focus first on that, reducing the overgrowth of the bad bugs in the gut. And what do I mean by bad bugs? So you've probably heard of acute gut infections like we get with food poisoning or traveler's diarrhea that happens for a few days and then it hopefully resolves. We can also get bad bugs that stick around for weeks or months or even years. In fact, in one study, 80% of the patients who had IBS were found to have bacterial overgrowth in their small intestine. So bacterial overgrowth is not rare. And this kind of testing is rarely done conventionally. So if you have been diagnosed with IBS, I would definitely consider testing for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO or SIBO. I use a lactulose breath test to confirm bacterial overgrowth. That one is pretty convenient, non-invasive test to use. Fungal overgrowth also has the same symptoms as SIBO and IBS. So that's another thing to consider, is if there's too much fungus in the small intestine. The underlying causes of IBS or irritable bowel syndrome are not fully understood, but dysbiosis, which is the imbalance of too much bad bugs compared to good, the dysbiosis appears to be a really important factor in IBS. But how does that imbalance occur in the first place? So in order to answer that, let's back up a little bit for a second. Maybe you've heard of the gut flora. That's the bad bugs and good bugs in the gut, anywhere from the mouth all the way to the large intestine. But the microbiome might be a new term for you. The microbiome is similar, but it's actually referring to the whole community of microbes in an ecosystem like the body, like the human body. So the microbiome will include the gut flora, but also the flora on our skin, in our nose, on our scalp, everywhere in the body together. And these could be friendly bacteria. These could be potentially harmful microbes. They could be bacteria, viruses, fungus. But we know that we actually have a large number of microbes in and around our body. And some estimate between 3 to 10 times more than our number of human cells in our body. And so that actually makes up about 100 trillion microbes, which is about 6 pounds of living organisms. So this is why the microbiome is also called the invisible organ. But why it's important is because we rely on the microbiome. Maybe you've heard about gut flora helping for digestion, but the microbiome actually helps us with so much more. Day and night cycle, for example, whether we're able to have energy during the day and sleep at night. Also metabolizing medications, digesting food, but also generating nutrients that we need to live and repair our tissue. There are now thousands of research papers coming out on the microbiome, and in every body system that we study, we're seeing how important the microbiome is. We know about the digestion, but there's also even links with cardiovascular systems, our heart system, the immune system, even blood sugar control. Even we know that blood sugar is determined by what we eat, things like sugar, but even the overgrowth of bad bugs in our gut can actually affect insulin resistance at the brain level. So the microbiome has far-reaching effects in our body, and probably why the microbiome is also considered the next frontier of medicine. So what's a healthy microbiome? That's really one of the questions that we're trying to answer. It appears that there's no one ideal microbiome. Everybody seems to have their own unique pattern, kind of like a fingerprint. But the researchers are agreeing that it's the diversity of the microbiome that makes a healthy microbiome. And just like the ecosystems on our planet, Having a lack of biodiversity in our own microbiome makes us more prone to disease. So coming back to that question then, so how do we end up with dysbiosis, or the overgrowth of bad flora? There are multiple factors with this. In addition to, you probably know, oral antibiotics, but there are also things like pesticides in our food industry that's quite pervasive. So things like glyphosate, which is the active component of Roundup, we are all likely exposed to. We know glyphosate reduces the beneficial bacteria while it allows harmful gut flora to survive. The gut bugs, of course, eat what we eat. So depending on our diet, our gut flora can change. In the Western diet, we tend to avoid things like bitter foods and overemphasize things like salty and sweet foods. And that can affect the population of our gut flora. Of course, the lack of fiber as well in our diet. And then things like chronic stress or reflux medications that can affect our stomach acid strength. Thyroid conditions can contribute to this as well. Without that strong stomach acid, we're allowing more of the bad bugs into our system through our food or through our oral cavity. And then without that strong stomach acid to kill some off, the bad bugs end up actually surviving there in our gut. Another cause is an acute infection. We just mentioned things like traveler's diarrhea or food poisoning. That can end up becoming long-term dysbiosis. And then lastly, relatively recently, we're up later and therefore eating later in the evening. And this is a lot later than we have been doing probably for thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And that tips the scale to shunting more of the energy in our body to be spent on digestion instead of repair and recovery. So over time, that can cause issues with our gut health. So there are a lot of different things that can factor into why our microbiome, particularly why our gut flora, has become imbalanced. But if you've been working on your digestive health using digestive enzymes and probiotics, and you're not getting ahead, this might be the missing step of addressing those overgrowths of bad bugs. I want to share with you a patient's story. This patient had abdominal pain, heartburn, even started getting things like joint pain in his wrists and his feet. And it was worse with wheat products and beer. And then there were other foods that he couldn't quite pinpoint. He took probiotics and just didn't see much improvement with that. He took out beer and wheat, and it did improve somewhat. But when we finally identified that there was a yeast overgrowth, and addressed that with herbal antimicrobials, and then we went through the next 3 steps, Spark, Reboot, and Rebalance, he was able to reintroduce wheat and of course have a moderate amount of alcohol with no problem. So to summarize this step clear, we want to remove the weeds in the terrain first. So identify the overgrowth. That could be bacterial, that could be fungal, and then target with antimicrobials. And then remove any major triggers of food. Maybe that's alcohol for you. Maybe that's fermentable carbohydrates. And then of course, avoiding pesticides in our food as much as possible. So choosing organic foods when possible. It's always great to start with the Dirty Dozen, which is a list that you can get from the Environmental Working Group, ewg.org. That's the list of foods that have the highest pesticide residue amounts. So those are the ones that we would prioritize buying organic. So if probiotics aren't helping, I would definitely revisit this step, step 1, clear. All right, now that you've cleared the weeds, let's go on to the next step. Okay, spark. So this phase is really powering up. I like to think of it as powering up an engine in a car and making sure all the parts are moving properly. This may be particularly important to this step if you have any of the following: undigested food in your stool, feeling full quickly or for a long time after eating, feeling bloated or burping or right after eating. If you have chronic low iron or tendency to mineral deficiencies, if you've noticed that you get a thick white coat on your tongue or even black coat on your tongue, and then have you ever noticed feeling tired or getting loose stools or diarrhea after eating, even healthy foods like salads or smoothies? This particular step where we strengthen what I call the digestive fire, the ability to really break down foods properly, can be particularly important for these people. In traditional Chinese medicine, the digestion is thought of as like a fire or a burner. If the fire is strong, the food goes in and it's broken down completely. If the fire is weak, you can get a lot of the symptoms I just mentioned previously. And you can use timing, taste, and temperature to help stoke that fire. And what I mean by that is with timing, our gut relies on a really strong day and night rhythm, and a really strong rhythm in general. So you can maximize timing by, for example, having meals at the same time every day, and try to choose daylight hours. For example, 8 a.m., noon, and 5 p.m. for meals. You can strengthen the digestion this way, as well as have better gut movement and coordination with that consistent routine. Now, taste and temperature, what do I mean by that? The taste, you can actually use bitter tasting things like bitter foods like arugula, ginger, bitter melon. You can use things like apple cider vinegar and a little bit of water before you eat to stoke that digestive fire. Digestive bitters I love for this as well. Digestive bitters are tinctures that are usually made with gentian and some other bitter tasting herbs that can help to stimulate, stoke that digestive fire. And then temperature. If you have a weak digestive fire, you want to avoid snuffing out that fire with your food. So this is where avoiding cold or raw foods can be helpful. Avoid vegetable sticks, sushi, cold beverages. Stick with warm cooked foods, teas, even room temperature water instead of cold water or ice water. And then lastly, with traditional Chinese medicine, the digestive system processes both the food and thoughts. So if we're processing our thoughts, there's less resource available for digesting food. So avoid problem solving or processing strong thoughts while we're eating. And worry and overthinking is particularly hard on the digestive system. So consider maybe journaling, writing a few notes down before eating if you've got something on your mind. So to summarize, step 2 or spark is to strengthen that digestive fire, coordinate the gut movement for proper digestion and bowel movements by maximizing the timing of your eating the same time during the daylight hours every day, stoking the fire by eating bitter foods, as well as sticking with more warmer foods and beverages. And then lastly, digest food or thoughts, not both at the same time. All right, and then we're ready to go into reboot step 3. So once you've cleared and sparked, and we generally have less indigestion at this point, in the reboot step, we work on healing the gut terrain to help and address the other non-digestive symptoms, things like autoimmune symptoms, like joint pain or skin issues, things like hay fever or allergies. Maybe it's blood sugar issues for you or mood issues. The reboot phase is really important for healing leaky gut. which is pathogenic intestinal permeability. Maybe you've heard of the term leaky gut. This is surprisingly common. This is normally the intestines actually are selectively permeable to the nutrients from our food. But when there's chronic gut inflammation, this causes the intestinal cells to essentially separate and leak particles through that we don't want. So these compounds come into our bloodstream, and that can trigger an immune response. So this is a really important factor in a lot of chronic conditions. So to repair your gut lining, we want to be looking for things in our daily life that might be contributing to that inflammation in the gut. So that could be over-the-counter anti-inflammatories, that could be alcohol, could be food allergies. And then of course with gut lining, the great news is that it regenerates every 5 to 10 days. We have a new gut lining. So the potential here is huge. So looking for nutrients that can help to replenish the gut lining, like glutamine. And I'll talk about some foods in a moment. The other really important part of this step is to fertilize and reseed the gut terrain. So what I mean by fertilize is things help feed the good bugs that are there. So things like fiber and lots of variety of foods. This is a great time to also replenish with probiotics. So without doing the clear or the spark phases, doing probiotics can actually be ineffective or even make you feel worse. So doing the clear and the spark, setting that terrain up for the probiotics to replenish, you're in a good place to do that at this stage. I have a patient with rheumatoid arthritis. She had muscle tension and joint pain in multiple areas of her body, and she had already seen that link between her indigestion and joint pain. Even before she came to see me, because she did a trial of an elimination diet and she felt great doing it, but she just could not continue to do it because it was so restrictive and she just couldn't sustain it. So she came to me to get some help on doing something that was sustainable. What we did is we started at step 1, clear. We identified the worst triggers for her and then went through step 2 to spark and reboot and start to actually heal the gut lining. And that way she was able to actually bring in more variety in her diet and still have less of that body pain. She says, and I quote, "Many are pleasantly surprised to see how well I feel and physically look this past year." This reboot phase is really critical for rebuilding the gut and reducing the inflammation in the rest of the body. So what can we actually take action on in this reboot phase today? So you're looking for, of course, alternatives to maybe anti-inflammatory medications. Speak to your practitioner if you can do a highly absorbable form of curcumin, for example, or if there's things like alcohol that you can reduce to help stop the inflammation in your gut. Look for glutamine-rich foods. Cabbage is one of my favorites for this, but bone broth also is glutamine-rich. Traditionally, cabbage juice was used for healing ulcers because it was rich in glutamine, which is the food for your gut lining cells. And then we mentioned fiber and fermented foods, which help to feed the beneficial gut microbes, but also introduce some probiotics into the system. And of course, supplemental probiotics at this stage can be really helpful. I would also recommend when you're at this stage to see where the seeding of bad bugs might be coming from. In the first place I would check is oral health. If you've got cavities or gum disease, that's a little clue that there's dysbiosis in the mouth, in the oral cavity. Dysbiosis means there's an imbalance in the bad and good bacteria, even in the mouth. And of course, we're always swallowing that through our digestive tract. But also if there's gum disease, and for example, when you've lost your teeth and there's a little bit of bleeding in the gums, that could also be a portal where some of those bad bugs or the toxins that they produce can get into our bloodstream. So that's another place I would check your oral health to see if that might be reseeding some of the bad bugs in your gut. Okay, let's go to the last step here, rebalance. This is where we actually use your daily habits to regularly retrain and reinforce good gut function so that it becomes automatic. This is really where we're building that resilience in the gut so that we can quickly recover from a holiday dinner or a summer barbecue season, or having to eat late, or having to eat and change your meals because of shift work. These good daily habits are really great for building a stronger gut, but also helps with the functions of detoxifications and eliminating chemicals and metabolic waste products from the body. It also helps with microbial balance, not just in the gut, but outside of the gut, like on your skin, on the scalp, and the vaginal tract. The immune system is also affected by really good daily habits for the gut. So it helps with avoiding symptoms of joint pain or skin issues or brain fog. We often think about brain chemicals like serotonin, dopamine, melatonin as coming from the brain, and they do. But the gut produces actually 400 times more melatonin than the brain. And the gut also produces 90% of the serotonin in the body that we make. So your mood and PMS and insomnia can actually be related to your gut health. So what can we do at this stage? There are lots of things that we can do. And one of the best is to really optimize your day and night patterns. From a Chinese medicine point of view, I think of this as very strong yin pattern and very strong yang, so that you're having both the yang, which is generally day and movement and activity, maybe 12 hours of the day being strong yang activities, and then 12 hours of the day being more yin activities. So sleep, but also just resting, having alone time, quiet activities. So going back to waking and sleeping times, having consistent times from day to day. And of course, trying to be in sync with nature if possible with the day and night times. And then we talked about eating before, being consistent meal times, but also notice if you're actually having more hours eating than you are fasting, then you may want to shift that a little bit so that your fasting hours are just as long as your eating hours. And that's generally fasting overnight. So at least 12 hours of fasting overnight to aim for. And then aim for variety in your diet. Every time you go out to shop, try a new fruit or a new vegetable or a new spice that you haven't tried before, and help to support that biodiversity of your gut flora. And of course, digestion and healing happens when we're in the resting state. So making sure that we have those rest and digest type of habits and activities in our daily habits. So journaling, reading, connecting with other people, or connecting with yourself in alone time. Many of the actions in the rebalance stage can be started right away. This is really the only steps where you can actually start this today, many of them, without going through all the three previous steps fully. Now, for some people, introducing more fiber in their diet right away might actually be difficult to do, or introducing a lot of variety can be difficult to do right away. But the other activities around your day, like the eating and fasting cycles, and resting and digesting habits and activities, those are great to start right away. So let me just summarize just the action steps so that you can be clear on what you can get started on today. So with clear, this is where we're removing the weeds in the garden first, identifying the overgrowth and getting rid of the overgrowth with antimicrobials. So removing the foods that you think are triggers alcohol, wheat, fermentable carbohydrates, and then choosing organic foods whenever possible. EWG.org is where that list of dirty dozen foods are. All right, and then that's for the first step, clear, and some of the things that you can get started on right away with that. Don't forget, if you need to identify overgrowth, bacterial overgrowth or fungal overgrowth, testing could be helpful for this. With Spark, that's the step 2. Some of the things that we can do in this step is timing, taste, and temperature. So timing, regular meals, same time every day during the daylight hours. Taste, using bitter foods or bitter digestive bitters or lemon juice in water or apple cider vinegar in a little bit of water with your food can be helpful to spark or stoke that digestive fire. And then temperature, choosing more warm foods over cold foods, choosing warm or room temperature water instead of cold ice water. And then lastly, digest food or thoughts, not both at the same time. And then the step 3, reboot. So this is where we get to repair the gut lining. So we're looking for alternatives to anti-inflammatory medications that might be affecting your gut lining, looking for things that may be inflammatory to your gut, like alcohol. Glutamine-rich foods are great at this point because they can be really healing. Things like cabbage, bone broth, and then fiber and fermented foods. This is where we typically can tolerate a lot more of these foods. And also they would be really beneficial to improving the gut flora. And then if you're going to use probiotics, this is when the probiotics can really shine at this stage. And then last step is rebalance. So this is where you can use your waking and sleeping cycles. You can use your eating and fasting cycles, even just having a regular exercise routine during the day, and then having moments of stillness and quiet during the evening times. These cycles can be really helpful for supporting a good, strong gut and reinforcing all of the actions that we've taken before this, and do it in a way that's quite automatic after a while. So those are the 4 steps: clear, spark, reboot, rebalance. Remember, for the most part, you do want to start at the clear stage and go down in order. I hope that you've gained some insight into how to support and strengthen your gut health to improve your overall health. If something in today's presentation resonated with you, I encourage you to put it into action. If you think you could benefit from individual guidance, I'm available through Brio Integrative Health Center. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time. Thanks. Bye.